What's up, boys? I figured I may as well do the next one of these question answering videos. I'm still on vacation in Montana, but I have the time, so why not? And I hit the target number of comments on the last one, so I figured may as well get the next one up. So the first question was, do you have any experience using a mouth guard while training? Do you feel any benefits? Just wanted to add, thank you for taking your time out of your day to make these videos. Answer. Oh wow, okay, that's long. So I'll answer the first thing first. Yes, I have tried it. No, I don't think that the proposed force output benefits are real. In my opinion, I don't think that makes a significant difference. If you learn how to output force, you should be able to do it regardless of what your jaw is doing. You shouldn't get any more benefit than you get from like muscle recruitment just from squeezing the bar, because whatever the name of the phenomenon is, like, oh, if you tense up your grip, you can fire your triceps harder. Oh man, I don't think that has any meaningful impact on your strength and training. That being said, if you chomp really hard while you're lifting, take care of your teeth, buy a mouth guard. Just wanted to add, thank you for taking the time out of your day to make these videos and answering all those questions. And everyone else that I and everyone else asked, I appreciate all the great information you are putting out for free in these videos. You inspired me to clean up my diet, eating a bunch of junk on a daily basis. Well, I'm glad. I think that nutrition is the real missing part for a lot of guys who are getting into powerlifting and are kind of stuck in that intermediate zone and really want to push towards being advanced. I think really cleaning up the nutrition is one of the commonalities between like people who are stuck just trying to break through to whatever the next level might be, because usually to make it to any point you did hone in your training process, and then at some point you hit that thing where you have to realize that you need to hone in your outside of the gym process. Now eating cleaner and more whole foods, such as white rice, good, eggs, chicken, fish, veggies, potatoes, milk, and fruit. I actually enjoy eating clean as well. It tastes pretty. Yeah, okay, so that's the thing that I don't understand is people make it seem like it's a real sacrifice, but if you can, like, I can't cook worth a shit, and I can still make those things taste okay. Just put some salt on it and cook it like semi-properly. It tastes pretty good, and it's more affordable than eating junk food a lot of the time. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a big misunderstanding, and I'm glad you benefit from these, man. I enjoy doing them, and that's the primary reason I do them. You know, as much as I would love to say I like helping people, I just kind of enjoy them. Do you cook all of your meals in the same day you eat them? Or you make a bunch of meals a day? Okay, so that's something I've experimented with that I think you guys could learn from as well, because I've gone through the trial and error. So I really wanted to prep a whole week's worth of food. That gets kind of gross, you know, if you have food sitting around for about 6 days before you have to make more. Because I noticed I would watch all these videos of how bodybuilders prep food because I'm trying to learn. Why not learn from someone who is very large, eats a lot of food, and has to prep a lot of food? And I noticed they would only prep 3 to 4 days at a time. And I was like, those idiots, they could just do a whole week on the weekend and be covered. It does get kind of gross, so I usually prep about 3 to 4 days ahead of time, and usually what I personally do is I will just prep my protein. So I'll cook my chicken, and I'll cook my beef, and I'll cook fish if I'm eating it, all ahead of time, and I'll store it in the fridge. And then I make the rice day of, just because rice sitting that long sucks. And if I steam my vegetables, I do that day of as well, just because they don't tend to sit well, and it's really quick to just throw them in a pot with some water. But yeah, I think you can save a lot of time and make yourself efficient just by prepping the protein. I think prepping out whole meals oftentimes is so daunting for people that they won't do it, and it doesn't benefit that much past just prepping the meat itself, the protein sources. 3 McChickens and 3 McDoubles. That is a high-calorie meal. Sounds like something I would enjoy. This is referring to Max's go-to McDonald's order. I'm assuming you don't eat fast food or have cheat meals. No, I don't really. You know, I'm poor as shit, so it's cheaper to eat in. And I just feel more on track for my goals if I'm following a plan. That being said, I will mix in fast food if I'm traveling and I'm coming up horribly short on my calories, because for me, eating a sufficient amount of food has always been the hardest part of training. So I would rather feel like shit and, you know, any negatives that might come with fast food, rather than come up short on my calories, right? So he says, when's the last time you had fast food? Really not that long ago. I've been traveling all week, so, you know, and like I'm, you know, not in my house, and so to me, as someone who really struggles to eat enough, and that's specifically my issue, not really getting in quality food, you know, it's a tool to use sparingly. I find that, people like me back when I was skinnier, I was like, oh, I've got a high metabolism, I have to dirty bulk. No, just fucking try harder, man. Like I just try harder, eat more often. It is a tool to have in your toolbox. I would never say it's so bad you should never do it, but a lot of the time people over rely on that tool and kind of keep that in the back of their head. They're like, oh, I'll just skip this meal and get fast food later. No, it should be a last resort. You should plan ahead of time so that you don't have to take that step often. Have you ever dealt with sciatica? How did you go about treating it? Thank you for taking the time out of your day to make reviews. You're welcome. I personally have never had it, but I've coached a few guys through some pretty bad sciatica. There's a lot of debate in the physical therapy community whether sciatica is what the cause of sciatica could be even diagnosed as, and like there's a lot of people pushing that piriformis syndrome isn't a legitimate diagnosis and there's no evidence to support that. I don't want to get into that. That isn't my scope of practice. I'm just finishing up an exercise science degree. I don't have a physical therapy degree. Don't want to get into that. So I'll just tell you the things that have helped is if you pull conventional, taking some time to pull sumo has seemed to alleviate a lot of pain for the guys I coach. That's been a really commonality. They're all sumo pullers. They're all conventional pullers with relatively weak hips. So, doing more unilateral work to strengthen the hips, doing sumo, really taking time to slow down the squat and develop the hips with some slow negatives and pauses, dialing back the load temporarily so as your pain subside a little bit, and then reintroducing things with really prioritizing building up your hip strength, specifically your glutes, especially with like unilateral stuff. A little bit of hip thrusting could be good. But yeah, that's my answer. That's tended to help everyone who has come to me dealing with some sciatica. What is your generalized approach to dealing with small injuries? Appreciate the content. It's a valuable way to spend time at work. Oh, you're welcome. Generally speaking, right, so this is a really tricky one that comes with time lifting, is knowing what's serious, what isn't serious, what should be trained through, what should be trained around, right? Because I don't believe in not training. It's not what I do. If something is bad, I will train around it. If it is not bad, I'll train through it, because you do need to challenge something to stimulate it to need to get better almost. Like you'll heal up faster if you're routinely just kind of pushing up to that boundary. So if it's a small thing that I believe training through the pain will not worsen the injury, I will train through it. If I feel that training difficultly will further put me backwards, what I'll do is I'll push just up to that limit of what is like just a slight discomfort, and I'll try to progress what I can do as that slight discomfort limit, and I'll do it often, like 3 to 6 days a week. I'll do a lower scale thing and really push up against that as an aggressive rehab approach. So like my knee, I'm going to be doing leg extensions 3 to 6 days a week, just gradually building up my tolerance that point, and then I'll start reintroducing squats and build those up as well. So you really want to be just pushing that boundary, not over jumping it, but don't be lazy. If your rehab looks like doing nothing, you're probably not going to put yourself in as good of a position as someone who's doing low scale stuff to stimulate blood flow many times a day. That's something that I saw Chris Duffin post about, and I was like super interested right away, because it seemed like he was coming back from these like medium grade muscle tears faster than anyone I'd ever seen. And part of it was there's like this STAR approach to rehabbing injuries. A lot of it is just doing like low scale, just slowly pushing those pain boundaries and stimulating blood flow at a very high frequency through the day. And then just reintroducing the stimulus that caused the issue in a graded manner, and just keeping an eye on it, right? And being reasonably aggressive but not reckless with it. What is your height? I am 5'10". Would you recommend someone for the first year powerlifting stay in a calorie surplus or maintenance? I would recommend a small calorie surplus. Don't get obese. You're going to regret that. You're going to look like shit. You're going to feel like shit. And your nutrient partitioning could be worse. But you should be definitely gradually gaining weight as you start, because one of the most important things for a beginner is just packing on that initial muscle mass. Should I be hyped up on every training session or calm until competition? Okay, so that's a reasonable question. So first you have to place yourself on that arousal curve that I talked about in a past video, where the more hyped up I get, I do better, and then suddenly I start fucking stuff up and I do worse. So that is your optimal performance level, but you probably shouldn't be training at your optimal hype level all the time, unless it's nothing. Then always train at your optimal hype level. Only because you tend to get burned out a little bit quicker. Some people could sustain it. Blaine Sumner loses his damn mind every time he trains, but most people would start to really have a hard time pulling that switch if they did it every single training session. But that being said, it should be present in your training because you don't want to be in a competition setting in a way that you've never trained, because that could lead to some questions about whether you went too far with the hype. I hope that helps. It's really just kind of using it sparingly. How would you program for a newer lifter? I put a lot. Okay, sorry about that. I got a call. I believe the question was, how would I go about programming for a newer lifter? I've been lifting for about a year, and recently I've started training the Texas method. I have 2 volume days and 2 heavy days, along with a rest day, active recovery days in between sessions. I try to add weight most of my sets each week, 3 times a week. I have a deload. Would there be any benefit to block periodization instead? Also, how do you stick to a cut? I don't mean to be rude, but the way you stick to it is you just use your discipline, man. Like, if you don't stick to it, you quit. I'm sure there are tricks to get around that, but you could just also not quit. It's entirely a choice. I hope that doesn't come off as rude, but realistically, that is the answer. Your videos are so educational and I find them extremely helpful. Thank you, man. I really do my best. But to answer your question, I would put a lot of thought into this. Actually, that's why I delayed making this video, because I didn't want to give a bad answer. And I'm going to go so far as to say that the progression scheme as a beginner doesn't matter a whole lot. Your rate of progression is going to be somewhat similar regardless because you are newer. So that being said, the thing, you're going to determine your rate of progress based on your outside the gym stuff and your effort within the gym, but the progression scheme itself, I think, matters a bit less. As long as you're following some core tenets, like you're doing the motions you wish to get good at somewhat often so you can learn them because you're still newer. Developing technical masteries on those lifts is very, very important because you don't have it yet, so you need to be doing them frequently. That's why I wouldn't recommend like a conjugate approach. Something really highly varied where you never get to dial in your technique. So as long as you're doing the exact lift you're trying to do often and developing your technique and not training at such a high intensity, you're unable to develop your technique because you're always grinding out reps and having breakdown. As long as you're doing that, and then you're also, you said you're doing volume, I would also do a reasonable amount of bodybuilding accessories, just because early in your career, putting on some degree of muscle mass will carry you a lot further than like a hyper-specific program. Focus simply on just the technical aspects. So as long as you're following those core tenets of like prioritizing gaining muscle mass and like learning the lifts you wish to get good at, I don't think it matters too much. I think there's nothing wrong with the Texas method. I'm a lot less judgmental about programming styles than I think some people are, because I really think that the program isn't what makes the lifter. That's something I used to think. I'm like, oh, the program matters. The program matters. Oh man, you can get strong as hell on a dumb program if you nail your outside the gym stuff. I don't know. So that would be my take. I hope that's helpful, man. Because I think the best thing is not to think in absolutes of like, these are good programming, these are bad programming, but to think in like those principles is like, okay, am I checking these boxes? If so, yes, then let's just do the way I enjoy the most is how I would do it. How important are knee sleeves or elbow sleeves for training? Not important. Would you say they are more important than a wrist wrap and a belt? Okay, so going through elbow sleeves, super not important at all. In my opinion, I wear them because I think they look cool. My elbows don't even hurt. And I like to think I don't get weight out of them. I just like how they look. Knee sleeves can be nice if you have some issues with your knees. I think they can be. You don't want them to cover up poor mechanics ever, so you should be able to squat well without your sleeves on. I think a lot of people can't, but they're absolutely not necessary. There's some people who just don't train in them and get quite strong. That being said, if you do have some knee issues, as long as you're moving well, they can help with that. Wrist wraps, also unimportant. I think if you know how to hold the bar for a bench low in your palm and set it well, I can work up to a very high percentage of my relatively heavy bench without them. I don't think those matter all that much, and I think a lot of people can get them for the squat because they just bear too much weight in their hands and their wrist hurts. They put on wrist wraps, okay, cool, now your elbow hurts instead. I don't think those are necessary. Belt is a nice tool, especially if you plan on competing. I would buy the knee sleeves, the wrist wraps, and the belt because you're allowed those in competitions, but elbow sleeves, no. Elbows flaring a bit when bench pressing. My elbows are not so flared when I descend on the bench, but when I press, they flare. Is this bad? Should I lower the weight? Work on not flaring at all? No, I think that the super tucked bench is a relic from back back when lifting was all done in suits, and that's how you would get the most out of the suit. At the end of the day, the bench press largely is a pec exercise, right? So why would we not want to use our pecs by going out a little bit? There is going to be a natural degree of flare that depends on the width of your grip and where you're touching on your chest. I think the problem might be that you're over tucking on the negative, touching at too low of a point, and then your body's like, fuck, I want to use my pecs, right? Because they're strong, and they're like a large muscle that I could be using to move this, and I'm avoiding them. And then when things get difficult, you need to use them. So you may as well actually try playing around, make sure you're keeping your back tight and all the regular fundamentals of benching, but move your touch point up and have a little bit more flare, have that slight pull apart pressure on the bar, on the negative, and load into your pecs. So, because sometimes when you favor towards a different pattern, it's because you have strength there, so you may as well utilize that in your negative. Yeah, so like, I would play around with that. If I'm comfortable and used to squatting barefoot, is there an advantage to buying heels where it would not be worth it? Absolutely not worth it. If you can hit good positions, quality positions, and you're comfortable in flats, do not buy heels. My rule, there are exceptions, but my rule most of the time for powerlifting is if you can hit good positions in or out of heels, favor the no heels. If you need the heels to hit good positions, wear heels. But that also means you should be able to do a technically proficient squat without them. If you need your heels to do a good squat, you're over-reliant on them, and you probably benefit from working on some barefoot work and learning the motor pattern better, and instead of relying on external aid always. That being said, but if you can do really well either way, I would stick to flats, man. That's just my opinion, but it seems to have panned out pretty well for everyone I coach. That like that's my knee jerk. We play around with both, and usually ends up being that way. Do you always deadlift with straps? If one was always to deadlift in straps, get strong strap deadlift, would you say their non-strap deadlift would get stronger if they decided to ditch the straps? Have you messed around with hook grip? Do you like it? Hate hook grip. Did mess with it. My hands are fat and small. At least that's what I tell myself because I don't enjoy it. That being said, my heaviest deadlift ever was done without straps. I did 765 with a mixed grip. I just don't like doing mixed grip on conventional deadlifts. Because I train conventional for strongman and I train sumo for powerlifting, and you're allowed straps in strongman, so it makes sense to me that when I'm training conventional deadlifts, I wear my straps, and when I'm training sumo deadlifts, I avoid my straps at all costs. I don't think I've ever done a strapped sumo pull. So yeah, that would be my answer. And if someone were to get a strong strap deadlift, would you say their non-strap deadlift would get stronger? Yeah, it's just a lot of work to catch up your grip, man. If your goal is to increase your strapless deadlift, never use straps. Like, unless you're a hook grip guy, then you have to work around it. That makes sense. That being said, like, just take it from me. A grip issue is just such a pain in the ass. Don't avoid it. It's so much easier to stay out ahead of it, not use straps, throw in some holds after your last rep, maybe do a little grip work and avoid it happening in the first place than to try to play catch up. Trust me, it's no fun. And you can think, oh, I've never had a grip issue before, it'll never happen to me. I thought that. Everyone who's ever had a grip issue has thought that. Get out ahead of it and really try to avoid working. If your goal is, especially if you pull mixed grip, if your goal is to have a well-developed bare hand deadlift as much as you possibly can, and don't lie to yourself about how much that is. Your hands hurt a little bit, you can still hang onto the bar, What happened to the Sheether Brothers YouTube channel? That is Max's channel. It's not dead, he's just lazy. Nothing happened to it. We made a second video at some point. Max just doesn't like setting up his phone to film every single thing we do, very understandably, because it kind of distracts from training. If someone lacked the technical aspect of lifting and made up with pure muscle mass, could they compete at the world level? To some degree. It depends on just how underdeveloped their technique is. I think the more advanced powerlifting gets as a sport, the less and less likely someone will be able to do that, because someone with a similar amount of muscle mass with good technique will smoke them. And as we have more and more genetic outliers in the sport, as the athlete pool grows, that becomes less and less likely. That could happen in the past, is less likely to happen now, and the better the sport gets, the less likely it will be to happen, I guess would be my answer. Not the greatest question, but is there a limit to how much neat powerlifting strength athletes can perform before it starts to impact progress in the gym? Mainly steps as an example. Number of steps too high. It would have to be pretty high, in my opinion. I think that would be a pretty high bar to set for it to really start negatively impacting your training. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't worry about it unless you're working like an absurdly physical manual labor job.